My name is Brian Chandler. I'm the National Director of Transportation Safety at DKS Associates, so working to reduce the frequency and severity of traffic crashes.
Why is having Pedestrian Safety Month so important?
Any kind of recognition like this is just trying to bring an important topic to our minds. And even though we, particularly in the last decade or so, have very much encouraged, pedestrians, bicyclists, and others to use the road or to travel in different ways, we still haven't really built the system for them. And so while they're making the decisions that we've asked them to, they are walking on roads that really aren't designed for their safety. So that unfortunately has resulted in people getting hurt and killed in traffic crashes as pedestrians, because of their vulnerability.
And what role do you think data and technology can play in helping improve road safety for everyone?
We don't know where people are going to get hurt and killed in the future because that's pretty random, but we do know the types of roads in which they are more likely to be hurt and killed in the future. And that's rural curves, that's high volume traffic signals, really any high volume intersections where you have a lot of interaction. We can use vehicle volume to identify what safety risk might be, even for pedestrians based on vehicle volume. And lots of other layers, including, a lot of the work that you all do at UrbanLogiq to bring in the census data, to bring in other layers of demographic data. The combination of that data with some of the more traditional ways that we've looked at crash and safety risk I think is really the key. Using new, bigger data sets, definitely experiment on what are ways that we can do better at identifying safety risk by using new technologies, new data sets, and then new tools to try to look at that data. Roadway data, as I mentioned, is super important, but also thinking about these new data sets. There's connected vehicle data outputs now that allow us to see where people having rapid deceleration. So that might be a precursor to rear end crashes. Where are people making rapid lane changes? When do they have their windshield wipers on? This is all data coming out of these connected vehicles. We haven't even really, in my opinion, scratched the surface on how we could be using more of this information so that we can make better, more targeted investments.
When it comes to safe streets and pedestrian safety, what do you think is the correlation?
Knowing that if we're encouraging more pedestrians to be walking, especially in our cities, but really everywhere, we need to facilitate that. We need to think more broadly about who is living here, where do they want to go, and then what can we do to try to make that connection. We're not always going to have the hard black and white data to make the best decisions, but we still can have conversation, have other data sets that can then help us make those decisions to help pedestrians be safer. There are some places around the country that are doing this work, and so they are building more sidewalks, protected bike lanes, shared use paths for pedestrians and bicyclists. We are adding more treatments to traffic signals like lead pedestrian intervals that give pedestrians a little bit of a head start before the adjacent vehicles go. Being sure we're being very careful with pedestrian clearance intervals, which is giving pedestrians enough time to cross, especially older pedestrians, younger pedestrians, and large groups.
From an infrastructure perspective, how can road safety be improved? What should governments keep in mind?
Lots of different treatments. I won't run down the 112 things that folks can do. I did want to focus on current and then I guess new or recent and upcoming funding sources. One that's been around for a long time is called the Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP. This is a funding source that flows down from the US DOT. It's administered by the state DOTs, but in pretty much every case, there's also funding available for local agencies as part of that. But that's a really good source for all kinds of safety treatments, including treatments for pedestrians. Pedestrian safety and school safety are interlocked. A lot of kids walk to school. We've encouraged kids to walk and bike to school. A lot of states continue their Safe Routes to School program and still have grant funds available specifically related to schools. Another new funding source this year is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, SS4A. And that is $1 billion per year for safety infrastructure and safety planning efforts. So there's a lot of great work that can happen there for pedestrian treatment. Frankly, the HSIP is larger than it's ever been. It got a big boost in funding from this latest transportation bill. And the SS4A is a brand new program, is more money than we've ever seen. The other key part of SS4A is that it's local agencies only. So that's a very large, as I mentioned, $5 billion over 5 years funding source that state DOTs are not eligible for in this case. There are some requirements of having a safety action plan in place before you go after the implementation funds. The idea being that USDOT wants local agencies to be able to have a feel for what their needs are before they go after implementation money. So it's a really, at least unique in my career, unique opportunity for local agencies to have access to a very large amount of funding to do large projects that they maybe weren't able to really consider before by looking at this program. Also, there's a big encouragement for joint applications. So if there's either cities near each other or cities and counties together or transit agencies or regional planning organizations and NPOs, there's a lot of folks who can get together to go after this funding source together.
And what about dashboards? How do they help improve road safety?
In transportation, I know we and our clients have more data than we know what to do with. We don't really know how to analyze it, especially with the big data and the real-time data. We have new data coming in like literally 10 times a second. Every second can be a little bit overwhelming. And so one thing that I think that dashboards can do, and folks like UrbanLogiq can help us with, is taking that data and turning it into actionable information. Then we have to pull that data in, understand how good it is, like what's the quality of that data, how timely is that data, how complete is it? And so dashboards have really helped me be able to see visually kind of what's happening in the city. What about crashes happening within a radius of schools? What about crashes happening within a radius of bars and other alcohol establishments? What about crashes happening in underserved communities? There are likely more unreported crashes in BIPOC and underserved communities in most cities. And because of that, then their safety needs aren't identified. They don't get as many resources and they continue to be more underserved. That gap continues to grow. So one of the things I think that dashboards can do is open up my eyes to some of these issues, some of these inequities, disparities that I hadn't identified yet, because I'd just been looking at black and white numbers. But we layer in demographic data, we layer in equity-focused data, and that allows us to see a more complete picture of what the safety needs are, and that the safety needs are not equal in different parts of the city, not just because of the crash history, but because of these other elements as well. I think having that dashboard just allows us to bring that new piece into what we had before that can provide us additional insights that then allows us to make better decisions with our investments moving forward.
We're just about done here, Brian. So just in keeping with the pedestrian safety focus, what can pedestrians keep in mind to stay safe?
This system is not designed for you. So don't rely on the crosswalk or the traffic signal or a stop sign or a pedestrian sign to keep you safe. You are in charge of keeping you safe. Just to not assume that you're safe in a crosswalk. I always, even taught my kids, don't look at your cell phone when you're in the crosswalk or when you're crossing the street. Just people are still talking and texting and driving. Just keeping an eye out, being very much alert when you're in a scenario where vehicles might be.
And lastly, what should drivers keep in mind when they're heading out on the roads?
We have a role to be defensive drivers and to be looking out for each other on the roadways and not only rely on the written rules of the road. So if I'm in a 3,000-pound vehicle, to expect people who are a 120-pound person walking across the street to have the exact same responsibility that I do, in particular on a system that has not been built for them, it's been built for me, I think there's additional responsibility for me as a driver to be looking out for them and paying attention to them.